Jesus said that God is love, and they that abide in love abide in God. We're abiding in the presence of the divine right here and now, in this presence and in this time and in this moment. And when we're not aware of that, or we think that somehow that we can be separated from that, then we experience the energy of going down the freeway the wrong way. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Inspiration. Beautiful. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I do see some familiar faces out there. It's always good to see all of you, and it's a pleasure for me to be here, and I feel honored to be asked to come and share some thoughts with you today. And as I was preparing, I came across a little video that said to really capture an audience's attention, you want to talk about at least three things right off, and one of them is money, the other one is safety, and the other one is sex. So we're going to talk about those today. No, actually not directly, but what we're going to talk about has an effect on all of them. So I came across another story that really spoke to me this week, and Irvin was driving down the freeway when the cell phone rings, and he answers it, hands-free, of course, and it's his wife, and she says, "Irving, I just heard the news that there's a car going down the freeway in the wrong direction. So please, be careful." And he says, "Yeah, absolutely. Not only, there's not just one, there's hundreds of them." Have you ever felt like you were going down the freeway in the wrong direction? Sometimes in life it does feel that way, but there is a direction in life. There's a direction that the universe has that is a flow for us, and when we're moving along with that flow, it makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? We don't tend to run into quite as much resistance in our experiences in life. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Any of you felt like you've been going down the wrong road at different times? Yeah, kind of going against the grain. And sometimes that's necessary, but when we find ourselves doing that consistently, that means that there's something going on in our energy field that's putting out an energy that's causing us to experience even more resistance in life. And that resistance usually shows up in some kind of or some form of fear. Now, fear could be considered anxiety or worry. Anybody ever worried about anything? Sometimes people do that, I've noticed. But the reality is that the universe is always trying to move us in a direction that's in our best interest. I'm absolutely convinced of that we're not here to always struggle against the grain, as they say. But there's a flow that we can move into when we allow ourselves, and it takes some work and it does take some practice because we're not really taught that from the time we're little. We're usually taught just the opposite in many ways. Tom Wilson wrote a Ziggy cartoon. It's a comic strip that I always liked, and he says, "I think I finally overcame my fear of flying, but now I'm afraid of airport metal detectors." Well, I'm sure there's always something we can find to be fearful of. Did you ever, you remember that commercial some years ago, Got Milk? Yeah, with the mustache, and it shows up on our face, right? Well, I'm going to ask the question, got fears? It usually shows up somewhere on our face or in our bodies. And most of the time, fear winds up being in our bodies. So today I'm going to look at a couple of ways that we can and look at possibilities of being more open to being aware of our fears, but not necessarily holding on to them. That's always a bit of a challenge at times. You see, there's a difference between fright and fear. Had you ever thought about that? It's normal and probably very useful to be fearful if you're standing on the edge of a cliff and to have fright of going over it. That probably is helpful, wouldn't you agree? It'll keep you a little bit further back from it. There are different situations in life that fright comes into our bodies, and it's there for a purpose. It's to help keep us safe and in these bodies for a little bit longer. Wouldn't you agree? And that's a good thing, wouldn't you? We came into these bodies for a purpose, for a reason, and we want to stay a little bit longer. And so fright is one of the ways that we take care of that, and it helps us to really be more conscious and more aware when we are doing different things in life that could cause some difficulty or some harm. So it's important at times for us to have experience. The difference is, of course, that what happens is when we have a frightful experience in life, that frightful experience oftentimes is stored in our physical bodies. Now, we tend to think that we're just afraid up here, but it goes into our bodies. Have you ever noticed, how many of you have ever done public speaking? Do you know that that's the number one fear that people have is public speaking? Anybody get butterflies when you're asked to public? Yeah. Your body shows up the anxiety and fear, doesn't it? Well, even kind of singing. When you get up, if you're doing a solo, anybody have done a solo lately, and you get a little butterflies up there, and it's a way that your body is actually remembering and projecting into the future a frightful situation. So we have a fright, it gets stored in our body, and then we have other experiences that remind us of that frightful experience, and those are our fears. So fear is something that we don't necessarily want to hold on to because it's not happening right here and now. If you're not in the here and now, then you're no longer, if you're in the here and now, your fear is not going to be present. Oftentimes, we find that we are not in the here and now. We're somewhere in the past, or we're projecting something from the past into the future. And so our work, I believe, is to move into a place where we're conscious and aware of the fears, but not necessarily being run by them. You see, we think that unconsciously, our ego consciousness basically thinks that if we hold on to the fear, that somehow we're going to be protected from something bad happening in the future. How is that working for you, right? The reality is that fear in and of itself is using the same energy as our imagination and our faith, but it's using it in the wrong direction. We're going down the wrong direction on the freeway. We're holding on to a fear with a thought that somehow that's going to keep us it's going to keep us safe somehow. But in reality, it becomes a magnet. And we actually draw to us more of those kinds of experiences that are fearful. And so when we're worried about something, we're actually putting more energy into what we're worrying about than about what we want to truly experience in life. And so part of our healing work, part of our transformative work, part of our spiritual work is to release those things that really are not serving us and move into an energy that radiates outward a sense of peace, a sense of love, of acceptance, of power. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, Jesus said, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who destroys both soul and body in hell." Now, the traditional idea of hell, of course, is this place that you go when you've not been very nice, right? But we have a little different understanding about what in unity. And hell is really a belief system that somehow says that we can possibly be separated from the divine. But in unity, we understand that the divine, God, Spirit, is everywhere, is omnipresent. Omnipresent, that's a big word, right? It means it's everywhere present. And we go through life with an understanding, as we practice this understanding, that there's really only the presence of the divine everywhere. Except, remember those exceptions, that we make up? We make up these exceptions. It's God's everywhere except over there, right? Or over here, or in them. But there is no exception in the omnipresence. The Course in Miracles basically said that there are really only two energies. There's love and there's fear. But what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. And love is the presence of the divine. Jesus said that God is love, and they that abide in love abide in God. We're abiding in the presence of the divine right here and now, in this presence and in this time and in this moment. And when we're not aware of that, or we think that somehow that we can be separated from that, then we experience the energy of going down the freeway the wrong way. Right? And so I've been really working with this idea that a big part of our spiritual work here is to make sure that we're heading in the same direction that the universe is heading, which is in the energy of light and love and peace and power. But it's interesting to me that we spend a lot of time and energy and probably money trying to be fearful. How many of you have gone to a horror movie lately? Not many of you probably. But it's amazing to me how much money is being spent on horror movies. We go to these experiences to experience fear. Why? Why are we doing this? Or we do something that sometimes is just as bad. We turn on the news. Or we think it's just as bad because there's an energy in what's being reported that's not necessarily in the flow of the universe. In Matthew chapter 10:29, Jesus said, "Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father." There is a presence and a power and an energy that is love, and that love is everywhere present, always present, in every circumstance, in every situation. And our work is to peel back the layers that we've created that disguise that from us. It's always there. Oftentimes fear is brought up when there's change. Anybody know about change? If you're not in change, you're not. It's true, isn't it? If you're not in somehow experiencing change, but why is it that we always seem to resist change? Well, I'll tell you, our minds, our mental, our brain is basically geared for two things. Our brain is actually geared for what's familiar, which it accepts, and really, we like familiar. And then what's unfamiliar. And the moment something unfamiliar comes into our experience, there's automatically a resistance to it. And resistance in itself is basically fear. And we have a tendency to resist what's going on out in the world. We have a tendency to resist all of the circumstances that are going on in our life that we think are causing us this anxiety and this fear. But I'll tell you, one of the things that came to me, it's been a couple of years now, in this very room, was a work that some of you are familiar with, called Whatever Arises, Love That. Who was here to hear Matt Kahn when he spoke here a few years ago? It was powerful, and there's something that really spoke to me about that. And one of the things that I began reading his work and began really working with it and praying and listening to what it was trying to teach me. And for the longest time, I thought he was saying, whenever anything happens, just love it. And that's true. But I think he was going even deeper than that. And what he said was, whatever arises, love that. And it occurred to me that what he was referring to is whatever arises in me about what happens out here, love that. Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Many of you know this story. And she spoke to the cells of her body and sent them messages of love and health and wholeness and healing and power. And it really is one of the key things that happened for her that allowed her to experience a healing physically. And I got to thinking about how we sometimes spend so much of our energy trying to resist what's going on out here in the world, and we don't really pay enough attention to what's really going on inside of us, about what's going on here in the world. It's so easy to say it's all about that, and all about them, and all about all this other stuff out here, but the reality is there's a power that's going on inside of us. I want to read to you something that really spoke to me from Matt's work. What happens if I stop fighting the things that seem to fight with me? And I'm going to change the word fight to resist. What happens if I stop resisting the things that seem to be fighting with me? What happens if instead I try to change the behavior, instead of changing the behavior of others, I become the first one to stop resisting, even if others are still fighting with me? And he goes on to say, this is a powerful mantra, he says, I accept the aspect of self that fights or resists only here to be loved as only I can love. And let me read that again. I accept that the aspect of the self that fights is only here to be loved as only I can love it. And that spoke to me. Because what we have a tendency to do is that we have a tendency to try and get something out here to love us the way we want to be loved. You ever remember that old song, looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces? We all do that, don't we? We're trying to get something out there to give us love. But in reality, we are already in that energy of love, and that energy of love is an essence of our being, of our nature. And so there's a saying, Paul said, perfect love casts out fear. I really, really reflected on that quite a bit. Perfect love casts out fear. Now, I'm not going to be so audacious to say that I completely understand perfect love. But I'm pretty sure that Louise Hay had it right, that love doesn't really fully exist unless you also are also loving the self. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is actually do a little exercise with me today. How many of you are willing to do a little exercise with me today? I love it. If you raise your hand, everybody just go, oh, that's great. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to, Tim mentioned that actually one of the things I do is emotional freedom technique. It's a form of psychological, emotional acupuncture, you might say, but it doesn't use needles, so you don't have to be afraid of that, okay? We just do tapping. And so in this exercise, what I'm going to invite you to do is actually just follow me. Keep your eyes open and follow me. And we're going to do a little practice here that I think will help you moving forward to notice, first of all, that you do have fears. We all do in some way. And so bring into mind some small anxiety that you perhaps have dealt with in your life. Doesn't have to be a big thing, just something that, some anxiety that you feel like you've dealt with in life and you're dealing with now. And so as you do that, I'm going to invite you to start tapping on the side of your hand here. And I want you to just notice, while we're tapping, if you can sense or feel a place in your body where that nervousness or that anxiety or that fear seems to reside. Maybe it's a constriction in your breathing. Maybe it's someplace in your chest or your throat, or maybe it's in your back. Sometimes it's in our legs. Sometimes it shows up in different ways in our physical being because it's been stored there. And so as you begin to tap, I want you to just notice where you notice that. And then from your own heart energy, notice your heart, and see if you can actually now send a little bit of love and heart energy to that place in you. And I want you to, we're going to do a little twist on EFT at this point. And I want you to just simply say, I love you. To that spot in you where you feel the fear. I love you. I love you. And then tap up here on your eye. I love you. And say it out loud. I love you. Now say it to that part of you where it feels the anxiety and fear. I love you. And then I'll go down to under the eye. I love you. Under the nose. Sometimes I have trouble loving you. But I'm willing to love you. Sometimes I don't know how to love you. But I'm willing to love you. And let's go to the collarbone. Sometimes you seem too big and fearful. And I'm willing to love you anyway. Now take a nice deep breath. Now, on a scale of 0 to 10, if before that energy of anxiety and fear was a 10, what would you say it is now? Go ahead and give me a number. 1, 3. How many of you, your anxiety level went down? If you look around. You see, love does cast out fear. And the love that mostly we are trying to experience is an energy that is completing that power of love from the divine by sending love to ourselves. And without that, there's not a complete circuit. It's kind of like an electrical system. You know what I'm saying? There's a power that's always trying to flow through us. But somehow it gets stuck because we're not willing to let it flow through us as love for ourselves. So your homework this week, and probably the rest of our lives, is to continue to let that circuit be complete and allow the energy of love to dissipate those fearful thoughts, those fearful feelings, those fearful energies in our physical body. Now, that's my lesson. I assume you're here for a lesson like that as well. So I invite you this time to really spend some positive energy toward healing and loving yourself in your physical body, and as you do that, you're actually healing not only yourself, but I believe, you know that saying, all boats rise together? I believe you're healing the world. And that's our lesson for today. Thank you.
Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I circulate, and I am grateful.